The sharp hum of fluorescent lights mingled with the crisp shuffle of Italian leather shoes as the Grand Axis corporate tower prepared for one of its most important afternoons in years. In the heart of downtown Chicago, glass walls glimmered with late autumn sunlight, while the top-floor boardroom buzzed with tension thick enough to choke a man. CEO Harrison Lowell paced in front of a gleaming 20-foot digital display, his face a mask of false calm. His tailored navy suit, flawless tie, and sharp jawline gave him the illusion of control, but his eyes betrayed him. Behind that polished exterior, Harrison was quietly panicking. The entire presentation was scheduled to begin in 7 minutes. A multi-billion-dollar contract with international investors from Singapore, Qatar, and London, streamed live to boardrooms around the world. If this deal closed, Grand Axis would triple its global valuation overnight. If it failed, Harrison knew exactly how fast the wolves would tear him apart. In the control booth at the back of the room, 3 IT specialists furiously tapped at their keyboards, sweat beading along their hairlines. Lines of error code spilled down the main monitor, flashing red messages no one wanted to see. System failure, primary server, unresponsive, backup, unavailable. "I don't care how you do it," Harrison snapped, his voice low and venomous. "But you fix this. Now." I'm trying, sir," stammered Alex, the lead technician. "It looks like a cascading kernel panic through the virtual clusters. I've never seen anything like it." "Then maybe you should stop being surprised and start fixing it," Harrison hissed. The boardroom's glass doors opened and a cluster of senior executives trickled in, murmuring nervously. Behind them came Marcus Johnson, the overnight janitor, still in his work overalls. He moved quietly, pushing his cart into a corner, as invisible as a shadow. Marcus wasn't scheduled for this shift. He'd traded hours with a colleague so he could pick up his son from school later. No one noticed him, and they never did. On the screen, the error codes multiplied. "Sir, we can't reboot without risking total data corruption," Alex warned. "Then risk it," Harrison barked. "If I lose this deal because you cowards can't manage a simple system." He didn't finish the sentence. The international investors were arriving. The Singapore delegation entered first, flanked by sleek assistants, their sharp eyes taking in every flicker of uncertainty. The London contingent followed, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and smug entitlement. The countdown clock above the display hit 5 high. Harrison's stomach twisted. If the servers didn't come back online in the next 5 minutes, years of ruthless positioning, backroom deals, and merciless boardroom battles would collapse, and it would happen in front of every competitor watching. At the back of the room, Marcus leaned quietly against his cart, wiping his brow with a rag. He didn't understand everything happening on those glowing screens, but one thing was clear. These people were scared. And then the doors opened again. A boy about 10 years old slipped into the room, wearing a faded hoodie 2 sizes too big and scuffed sneakers. He carried a worn backpack and looked around with wide, curious eyes. Elijah Johnson had arrived. Marcus's stomach dropped. "Elijah," he whispered urgently, "you can't be here right now, son." "I got out early, Dad," Elijah said, his voice quiet but steady. "They said it was okay if I waited for you." Marcus stepped forward, intending to usher the boy out, but Elijah was already moving closer to the command booth, his eyes locked on the flickering screens. No one else noticed him. To them, he was as invisible as his father. At 3:45 on the countdown, Harrison's phone vibrated with a text from the chairman. "Watching. Don't screw this up." A cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. At the control booth, Alex swore under his breath. "It's done. I can't stop it. The whole system's locked in a recursive loop." "That's bad." Elijah's voice piped up softly beside him. Alex's head whipped around. "Kid, you can't be here." But Elijah wasn't looking at him. He was staring at the lines of cascading code, his young face scrunched in concentration. Marcus grabbed for him. "Elijah, come on." "Wait," Elijah said, tugging his dad's sleeve. Dad, I think I know what's wrong. Marcus froze. In the room full of million-dollar suits, Ivy League degrees, and arrogance polished to a mirror shine, no one else paid attention to the janitor's kid. But Marcus looked down at his son. At those sharp, observant eyes, the way he tilted his head just like his late mother used to when she was troubleshooting electrical boards in their old neighborhood church. Elijah pointed to a line of code. See that? It's looping because someone set the watchdog interval wrong. It's stuck trying to verify a log file that doesn't exist anymore. That's why the backup won't start either. It's using the same bad config. The room didn't even hear him. They were too busy arguing about who would take the fall. Marcus knelt. You sure, son? Elijah nodded. I saw something like that on your old laptop. Remember when you were fixing the church's heating system computer last winter? It was kinda the same. Marcus's mind raced. Could you fix it, Elijah? The boy hesitated, then shrugged. Maybe. I mean, it's just numbers, right? A pause. And in that moment, with 1 minute left on the clock, Harrison's world hanging by a thread, Marcus made a decision that would change all of their lives. Come on, son, he said, standing up and taking Elijah by the hand. And together, they walked toward the control booth. If this story of injustice and transformation moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that turn pain into power. Harrison Lowell's jaw tightened as the clock ticked mercilessly toward disaster. The presentation room, once a gleaming sanctuary of power, had morphed into a den of panicked whispers and frantic gestures. The investors murmured in clipped, polite tones, but the cold irritation in their eyes was unmistakable. Get this fixed, Harrison roared at the IT team, slamming a palm against the conference table hard enough to rattle the water glasses. I don't care how, just fix it. Alex, pale and sweating, typed feverishly, his hands trembling so badly that the keyboard clattered under his fingertips. The other two technicians traded helpless glances, their screens filled with terminal errors and system failure logs. It's not responding, Alex croaked. We can't even access the boot partition anymore. This is a $300 million conference, barked Everett Dale, the COO. Heads are going to roll for this, starting with you. And so it began. The blame game. In boardrooms like this one, it was always blood first, solutions later. Alex opened his mouth to protest when Everett jabbed a finger in his face. You're the one who signed off on last night's maintenance window. If we lose this deal... Don't act innocent, Everett, growled Marianne Clark, the CFO, striding forward. Her voice was sharp, eyes narrow. Your department signed off on the failover plan. Where's the backup server you promised would be bulletproof? We did our part, Everett snapped back. If the logs are corrupted, that's on IT. No, it's on whoever authorized those security patches this morning, another executive shouted. As they snarled and pointed, none of them noticed the janitor's son slip closer to the command station, eyes flickering over the lines of code. Marcus hovered nearby, equal parts terrified and furious, but unwilling to back down. Dad, Elijah whispered, they're looking at the wrong log file. Marcus's throat tightened. You're sure? Elijah nodded, brow furrowed. And that folder shouldn't be there either. At that moment, Alex spotted Elijah standing too close. Hey, get the kid out of here, he barked. Heads turned. Everett sneered. What the hell is this? Marcus, get your damn kid out before I have security toss you both. Marcus instinctively stepped between them. He's just waiting for me. We'll go. But then Elijah spoke again, and his small, steady voice cut through the bickering like a blade. You're chasing the wrong problem, Elijah said to no one in particular. It's not the system. Someone's redirecting the boot command. That's why it keeps hanging. The room stilled. A couple of techs glanced up, confused. What did you say? Alex asked, voice sharp, more insulted than curious. Elijah pointed at a line of code. It's a hidden redirect. The system's trying to launch from a fake path. No way, Alex scoffed. Elijah crossed his arms. You missed it because you were looking at the timestamp, not the directory address. The fake folders got the same creation date as yesterday's updates. The silence deepened. Harrison glared. Are you seriously telling me this kid knows what's happening better than you? Alex's face went crimson. Sir, he's 10 years old. I don't care if he's 10 or 100. Can he fix it? Marcus put a hand on Elijah's shoulder, both protective and terrified. Elijah, are you sure? I can try, Elijah said softly. If you let me. Harrison hesitated, his gaze flickering to the investors watching from across the room, their collective patience disintegrating. Fine, he snapped. What have we got to lose? Marcus knelt beside his son, their eyes meeting. Be careful. Elijah gave a tiny nod, then slid into the chair, his small hands surprisingly steady on the keyboard. Alex moved aside, face twisted with resentment. The boy typed fast, a string of commands that startled even the IT team with their precision. He navigated directly to the hidden directory, cross-referenced its creation log, and isolated the foreign redirect command buried under what looked like harmless debug files. One of the younger technicians leaned in, eyes wide. Holy, he's right. Redirect loop, Elijah murmured. And the backup's using the same path because it was copied from the primary last night. Who put that there? Marianne asked, her voice suddenly brittle. Elijah didn't answer, but he didn't have to. He clicked open the properties log, and there it was. User Edale Everett Dale's face turned a shade of white no expensive tan could mask. Harrison's gaze snapped to him. You son of a... Everett raised his hands. I don't know how that got there. I didn't... Bullshit, Marianne snarled. Elijah, Marcus whispered urgently. Can you fix it? Elijah didn't even look up. Almost there. He terminated the redirect loop, pointed the system to the clean recovery path, and restarted the boot sequence. The screen flashed, the main display flickered. Grand Axis Global Presentation Interface, System Online. The room burst into collective, stunned silence. Elijah sat back, hands trembling for the first time. System integrity verified, one of the techs confirmed in disbelief. He did it. The kid actually did it. Marcus squeezed his son's shoulder, his voice choked. That's my boy. Elijah looked up at Harrison. You're back online. The CEO stared, utterly speechless. But the investors weren't. From across the room, a Singapore delegate rose to his feet. Very impressive. Perhaps you should hire your janitor's son. Scattered, awkward chuckles followed. But for Marcus and Elijah, it was no joke. And for Everett Dale, the noose was tightening. The moment the system blinked back to life, Harrison Lowell's face twisted into a mask of forced composure. A wave of relief swept through the boardroom, but the atmosphere was different now. The thin veneer of corporate invincibility had cracked, and in that fracture stood a 10-year-old boy no one had invited, no one expected, and no one could ignore. Elijah Johnson sat quietly in the oversized leather chair, the glow of the monitors soft on his dark brown skin. The hum of the machines was almost soothing now. He wasn't afraid, though he knew from the hard stares the suits were giving him that he'd stepped into something he wasn't supposed to. Marcus hovered nearby, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't know whether to grab his son and bolt for the elevators or to plant his feet and face whatever came next. The room's silence was shattered by Everett Dale, who stormed forward, his composure hanging by threads. I don't know what trick you pulled, but you had no authorization to touch those systems. His voice cracked on the last word, a tremor of desperation that didn't go unnoticed. Marcus tensed. My boy didn't do anything but fix your mess. Everett sneered. Stay in your place, Marcus. That was the wrong thing to say. Harrison's head snapped toward Everett, his eyes narrowing. Not out of decency. Harrison Lowell had never cared about decency, but out of survival instinct. The Singapore delegation was watching. So was London. Every investor on the live stream had seen it all. Everett, Harrison said softly with a poisonous calm. You'd do well to watch your tone. Everett's mouth worked, no words coming. One of the younger techs, emboldened by the shifting tides, cleared his throat. "Sir, he's not wrong. The kid saved us." And he found the redirect Everett planted. Gasps rippled through the room. "Redirect?" Marianne Clark's voice was low and dangerous. Alex, still shaken, nodded reluctantly. "It was disguised inside yesterday's patch update. The backups copied it too. That's why the system wouldn't boot. It wasn't just a glitch." The implications landed like a thunderclap. Marcus watched them, watched the way power shifted from one face to another, watched old alliances fray in the space of a heartbeat. He knew that look. The look of men and women realizing the ground under them had shifted, that what was safe a minute ago was now lethal. "Elijah," Harrison said, stepping closer, lowering himself to eye level with the boy. How did you even know what to look for?" Elijah shrugged, a nervous little gesture. "I watch my dad fix stuff all the time. He says if something breaks, it's usually because someone either put it together wrong or because someone wanted it broken." Harrison blinked. The room went silent. Marcus swallowed hard. "That's a sharp thing to say, kid," one of the investors murmured. Elijah glanced at his father. "You always told me it's not about how old you are. It's about whether you pay attention." A flicker of pride crossed Marcus's face, but Everett wasn't finished. "This is absurd. It's his word against mine, a kid's against a senior executive. There's no proof." At that moment, Elijah dug into the front pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small, scuffed flash drive. "I saved the logs," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to. When the screen glitched, it let me copy the activity file before it locked again. It shows who logged in, when, and what they changed." Harrison's mouth opened, then closed. Marianne grabbed the drive, handing it to Alex. "Check it." A minute later, Alex looked up, his face pale as death. "It's all here. The user ID, the timestamp, the redirect command, the corrupted backup path. Everything." Everett made a run for the door. 2 security officers were already there. "I wouldn't," Harrison advised coolly. The Singapore delegate smiled. "I believe this meeting has taken an unexpected turn." Everett's face contorted in a mixture of terror and fury. "This is a setup. A damn janitor's kit and a broken system." "Enough!" Marianne snapped. "You're done." Everett's shoulders sagged. Marcus stepped forward, protective instinct burning through him. "You're not laying a hand on my boy. Not after what he did for you people." Harrison raised a hand. "No one's touching him, on the contrary." He turned to Elijah. "Son, you've just done something no team of so-called experts could manage. You saved this company from a catastrophe." Elijah bit his lip, suddenly unsure. Marcus moved beside him. "We're leaving." But Harrison shook his head. "I won't let that happen." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You can't stop me." "I'm not stopping you," Harrison replied, his voice softer now. "I'm offering your son a place here." Marcus stiffened. "He's 10. And one of the sharpest minds I've seen in this building," Marianne added. "We fund scholarships, STEM programs. He should be in one." "I'd rather scrub floors than have him used by you people," Marcus said bitterly. But Harrison surprised him. "I get that," he said quietly. "I do. But you have my word. And you can hold me to it in front of every investor watching. This boy will have access to every opportunity we can give him." He turned to the room. "From this day forward, Grand Axis is launching a new youth tech mentorship program. And its first member will be Elijah Johnson." A stunned silence followed. Elijah looked up at his father. "Is that good?" Marcus crouched beside him, taking both small hands in his calloused ones. "It's good if you want it, son. Only if you want it." Elijah hesitated, then nodded. The Singaporean delegate smiled. A smart decision. As the investors began murmuring approval and Everett was quietly escorted out in disgrace, Marcus pulled his son into a tight hug. In a room where power had once belonged solely to the wealthy and well-connected, a janitor's boy had just changed the rules. And this was only the beginning. The room, once heavy with tension and concealed arrogance, now hummed with a kind of restless, uncertain awe. The Grand Axis boardroom had never been a place where people like Marcus Johnson or his son were meant to matter. It wasn't designed for their voices. It wasn't built to notice them. And yet, in the space of one afternoon, a 10-year-old with bright, curious eyes and an instinct for things most grown men missed had shattered that unspoken order. Elijah clung a little closer to his father as more executives in sleek suits and expensive watches gathered around. The conversation shifted rapidly, from crisis management to cautious praise, then to anxious speculation about damage control in the press. The Singapore and London delegates observed it all with guarded amusement. But Elijah, for all his small stature, didn't flinch. He watched them. He watched how they changed their expressions when Harrison Lowell turned his back, how some smiled thinly and others exchanged tight, unhappy glances. He watched Marianne Clark pocket the flash drive with the system logs, her fingers tense around it. He noticed which assistants typed notes furiously and which ones barely pretended. He noticed everything, and it wasn't because someone had taught him. It was because for all 10 years of his life he'd lived in a world where he had to. Marcus knew it too. He could feel his son's quiet alertness like a hum in the air. "Son," Marcus whispered, leaning in. "You all right?" Elijah nodded. "Yeah, but Dad." "What is it?" Elijah's brow furrowed. "There's something else wrong." Marcus stiffened. "What do you mean?" "The system," Elijah murmured. "It's not just the redirect. I saw the logs when I copied them. Someone's been pulling files and for months. Data that's not supposed to leave here." Marcus's stomach dropped. "You sure?" Elijah pointed to one of the monitors still displaying code in the corner. "That," he said. "The server log backup. See the file transfer marks? They don't match the scheduled times. And there's an external IP address in there. It's not one of theirs." Marcus exhaled slowly. He looked around. No one was paying attention to them anymore. The suits had gone back to circling Harrison like sharks. "Elijah, are you telling me someone's been stealing from this company?" Elijah shrugged, a habit he had when he knew something important but wasn't sure how to say it. "I think so. A lot." Marcus didn't know much about corporate networks, but he knew enough to recognize the look of a man whose instinct had just sharpened to a dangerous edge. "Can you prove it?" Marcus asked. "I think it's in that system log folder, the one no one checked." Marcus scanned the room. No way he was letting his boy dive back into those systems without someone trying to use him. Not now. "Stay here," he murmured. But Elijah grabbed his sleeve. "No, Dad, if I don't do it now, they'll bury it." His voice was quiet but steady. And Marcus recognized that tone. It was the same one his mother had when she stood up to their landlord. The same one that got her fired from her job at the electric company for reporting stolen pay. Marcus's throat tightened. "All right, son. Together." They moved back to the command booth, Marcus shielding Elijah from view while he perched on the edge of the chair. Elijah's fingers danced over the keys with an instinct that defied his age. A few quick commands, a rapid scroll through the logs, and there it was. Line after line of unauthorized data transfers, internal financial reports, patent filings, client lists, all routed through an offshore IP address, masked by dummy accounts. Marcus let out a long, low whistle. "That's not a glitch," he murmured. Elijah looked up. "Someone's stealing your company, Dad." Marcus had always known these people would step on each other for $1. But this was on a different level. He turned toward the glass wall of the boardroom, watching Harrison and Marianne deep in conversation. Would they even believe them? Would they care? But then a different idea sparked in his mind. Not about what they might do, about what they were already too late to stop. "Elijah, can you back that up?" The boy nodded. "Already did." He held up the same scuffed flash drive. Marcus grinned. Smart kid. At that moment, Marianne's voice cut through the room. Marcus, she called. Could you and your son come over here for a moment? Marcus felt Elijah's small hand grip his tighter. He leaned down. We got this, all right? You stay sharp. As they crossed the room, Marcus noticed how some of the execs wouldn't meet his eyes, but a few did. And what he saw wasn't contempt anymore. It was fear. Marianne offered a brittle smile. Elijah, you've done something extraordinary today. Truly remarkable. And Marcus, Grand Axis would like to extend an offer of gratitude. We're launching a tech mentorship program immediately, and your son will be its founding participant. Applause scattered through the room. Elijah's face stayed careful, unreadable. And Marcus, Harrison added, we'd like to discuss your position too. Seems we've been wasting talent in places we shouldn't have. Translation, they wanted to keep him quiet. Marcus smiled. Appreciate it, he said coolly. But first, there's something else you all ought to see. And as Marcus lifted the flash drive, with his son at his side, the entire room collectively tensed, because whatever fragile illusion of control these people thought they had was about to be ripped apart for good. The room turned electric as Marcus lifted the flash drive between his fingers. It wasn't large, not much more than a plastic sliver smudged from being jostled in a 10-year-old's pocket. But in that moment, it had the weight of a loaded weapon. And everyone in that gleaming glass and steel boardroom knew it. Harrison Lowell's mask of cool professionalism faltered just slightly. His voice, which for years could command billion-dollar mergers and fire executives with a single word, suddenly seemed less certain. What is that, Marcus? He asked, forcing an affable smile. Marcus looked down at Elijah, who gave a tiny nod. Something you'll want to see, Marcus replied evenly, and something you'll wish you'd seen a long time ago. Marianne Clark's eyes narrowed. If this is about Everett's sabotage, Marcus shook his head. No. Bigger than that? He stepped over to one of the side monitors still connected to the central display system. The IT techs were too shell-shocked to stop him, and no one else moved. A room full of people who thought themselves powerful, rendered spectators by a janitor and his son. Marcus plugged in the drive. For a second, the screen flickered. Then a folder appeared. Unauthorized transfers. Internal logs. Marcus clicked it open. Dozens of text files populated the screen, each one stamped with a date and time, followed by an offshore IP address. Alex, the lead technician, paled as he read the data. Oh my God, he whispered. Those are client files, internal financial statements, product roadmaps. Marianne stepped closer, scanning the logs. Her face turned an ashen shade of gray. This is corporate espionage, she muttered. Months of it. Elijah spoke, his small voice carrying clear across the room. I saw it when I was fixing the boot command. The same folder had a redirect. That's why your backup didn't work. It was copied too. The Singaporean delegate leaned back, arms folded, a rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Quite the security team you have here, Mr. Lowell. Harrison's face was a study in panic dressed up as control. We can investigate this internally, he said quickly. No need to involve outside parties. Marcus, whatever you want. I don't want your hush money. Marcus cut him off, his voice sharp and clean as cut glass. He turned to Elijah. How many files, son? 78 so far, Elijah answered without hesitation. All traced to one user account. Marcus gestured to the screen. Go ahead. Elijah executed a search command. The terminal scrolled, line after line, until one username appeared next to every unauthorized access. User, Chalowell. The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. A few execs swore under their breath. Others stepped away from Harrison, as though his proximity alone might tarnish their suits. Marianne's gaze locked onto Harrison's face. Is this a joke? Harrison opened his mouth, found no words, Elijah glanced at his dad. It's his, every file. I saw the code, Alex added, his voice subdued. It's authenticated with Lowell's system credentials. And no one else has access to the root server like that. The room came alive in hushed, stunned murmurs. The Singapore delegate spoke, voice low and cold. It seems your problem wasn't Everett Dale, Mr. Lowell. It was you. A new voice cut through the chaos, one no one had expected to hear. It came from Zoe Carter, the youngest and only black woman in the executive suite, who until this moment had been relegated to the periphery of this room's conversations, her warnings ignored, her reports buried. I've been telling you for months there were data anomalies, Zoe said, stepping forward. You dismissed me every time. She turned to Marcus. It took your son one afternoon to do what a dozen analysts couldn't. 'Cause no one in this building listens to the people who actually pay attention. Marcus met her gaze, something like solidarity passing between them. Harrison tried again, grasping at the last threads of control. This isn't what it looks like. There's context. No, Marianne cut in sharply. There's fraud, corporate theft, and negligence that could sink this company. She looked at the investors, now gathered in a tight knot of grim satisfaction. And unless we act now, we're all complicit. Harrison moved toward the monitor, perhaps to pull the drive, perhaps to lash out. No one would ever know. But Marcus stepped in front of him. Not today, Marcus said, his voice low and unyielding. Security moved. Harrison was escorted from the room without ceremony, his protests drowned in the rising tide of scandal. The Singaporean delegate clapped softly. Well, he murmured to his colleagues. It appears Grand Axis has just gotten considerably leaner. Zoe turned to Marcus and Elijah. You two just saved this company. Marcus exhaled, finally letting his grip on Elijah's shoulder ease. Not sure it deserves saving, Marcus muttered. Zoe gave a grim smile. Maybe not, but if it's going to be rebuilt, it should be by people like us. And for the first time, Marcus believed that maybe it could be. The boardroom remained eerily silent after Harrison Lowell's forced exit. For the first time in the building's history, the walls of glass seemed to tremble, reflecting not authority, but unease. The embezzlement logs scrolled slowly on the side screen, each line another nail in a gilded coffin. What had started as a crisis of failing systems had unraveled into something much darker, the exposure of the very man trusted to safeguard Grand Axis's future. But the room's silence wasn't one of relief. It was the thick, suffocating kind of silence born when powerful people realize the danger isn't over, and that they might be next. Marcus could see it clearly in their faces, the flickers of fear, the calculations beginning behind their eyes. The investors weren't concerned with the company's soul. They were worried about headlines, about shareholder reactions, about legal liabilities. The truth wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous. Elijah, still clutching his scuffed hoodie sleeves, stood quietly beside his father, his gaze locked on the screens as if the numbers spoke a language only he could hear. Marianne Clark was the first to break the silence. We need to contain this, she said, her voice tight. If this leaks before we're ready to manage the narrative, it'll trigger an SEC investigation, media vultures, and will bleed millions in stock value before sunrise. Zoe Carter stepped closer. Contain it? You want to hide this? After what that boy uncovered? After what you ignored for months? Her voice cut clean through the boardroom's glossy, polished veneer. The London delegate, a sharp-featured man with a clipped accent, folded his arms. We need to be realistic, Ms. Carter. The market doesn't reward moral indignation. Marcus felt his anger sharpen. Is that what you people do? Let your own rot while you pretend to be clean? Marianne shot him a look. No one here's denying what happened, Mr. Johnson. But how we respond matters. One wrong move and the whole company collapses. You should have thought about that before, Zoe snapped. This wasn't one executive's mistake. This was enabled by silence, by people like you who look away when it suits them. Marcus saw it in that moment, the unease in some faces, the shame in others, and a few, like the Singaporean delegate, whose eyes reflected something colder, calculation. And then Elijah, in that same quiet, unassuming voice that had already unsettled Titans, spoke. I saw more than just those files. Every head turned. What do you mean, son? Marcus asked carefully. Elijah bit his lip. When I copied the logs, there were access requests tagged Confidential Server 7. They didn't match any of the normal user codes. It looked weird. Marianne's face paled. Zoe's eyes widened. Server 7 isn't listed in our infrastructure. It's a ghost node. The IT techs exchanged anxious glances. What's on it? Marcus asked. Marianne hesitated, and Marcus knew. She knew. Elijah, Zoe said gently, crouching beside him. Did you keep a copy of those logs too? The boy nodded, pulling a second drive from his pocket. Security logs, timestamp records, and the IPs accessing Server 7. Marianne took a shaky breath. Those files, those weren't just corporate records. Marcus's stomach twisted. What then? Marianne's voice dropped to a whisper. Internal reports, compensation structures, hiring records, and rejection justifications. It's where Harrison kept records of employee dismissals and blocked promotions, particularly those involving candidates of color. It was a shadow HR file. Zoe clenched her fists. You mean discrimination files? Yes, Marianne admitted bitterly. It documents how certain applicants were passed over, how internal promotions were denied, how projects by Black and Latino staff were reassigned without credit. Harrison kept it hidden because he thought no one would find it. Marcus felt like the room shrank around him. 6 years he'd pushed a mop through these halls, invisible. 6 years his transfer applications, for maintenance supervisor, then facilities manager, had been misplaced. And now, a child with a flash drive had found the proof. Elijah's face scrunched in confusion. But why would someone do that? Zoe crouched beside him. Because people like Harrison think no one's watching. They count on it. They build systems that look fair on the outside and rotten underneath. Marcus swallowed hard. And what happens now? Marianne straightened. If those files exist, and they do, Grand Axis is facing not just internal scandal, but federal employment discrimination suits, SEC violations for falsified hiring reports, and class action exposure. And you still want to bury this? Zoe demanded. The Singaporean investor spoke then, voice cool and detached. Ms. Carter is right. The company cannot move forward carrying the weight of rot. It will be purged. He turned to Marcus. Your son has not just saved this firm's infrastructure. He's saved its soul and its future. Marcus placed a steady hand on Elijah's shoulder. Then let's see you prove it. Marianne drew in a long breath. I'll call an emergency board session. Full transparency. We'll notify our legal team, and Elijah, her gaze softened as it fell on the boy, will be acknowledged. Properly. Marcus didn't miss the investors' faces, some reluctant, some resentful. But they knew they'd lost control. The damage was too big to hide, and the boy standing in that room was no longer a problem. He was a symbol. And in a world obsessed with optics, symbols carried power. Zoe stood. We'll rebuild it right, starting today. For the first time, Marcus believed it, but he also knew power never left quietly. There would be another storm, and he and his son would be ready. By nightfall, the news of Harrison Lowell's expulsion was rippling through the corporate grapevine like wildfire. Even before the official board statement was drafted, whispers were darting through phone lines and private message threads, the industry's elite scrambling to position themselves before the scandal reached the financial press. The vultures were circling, and none of them wanted to be caught on the wrong side of history. Inside the Grand Axis executive suite, the atmosphere was no longer one of crisis management. It was damage control by any means necessary. Temporary calm settled over the room after the files were locked down and legal counsel summoned. But Marcus could sense it was far from over. He knew men like Harrison Lowell. They never left quietly, and he was right. At that very moment, in the private penthouse apartment on the 48th floor, a sprawling glass-walled fortress built for a man who believed himself untouchable, Harrison was pacing, his pulse jackhammering in his throat. The lights of the Chicago skyline shimmered against the windows, but Harrison wasn't admiring the view. He was dialing numbers, slamming the call button again and again when the connections dropped, cursing under his breath. "Dale, pick up the goddamn phone." No answer. Everett was already gone, thrown under the bus without ceremony. Harrison hurled his phone onto the couch, snatched a half-finished glass of scotch and downed it in one searing gulp. His hands shook as he poured another, the ice cubes clinking against the glass like the ticking of a clock he could no longer control. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. A janitor's kid. A damn child. Harrison's chest tightened as he replayed the moment Elijah's quiet voice cut through the room. That steady gaze, the surety of someone who'd never been told he wasn't allowed to belong there. It wasn't just the files. It was what they represented. Evidence of a culture Harrison had built. Of exclusion, of silencing, of hoarding opportunity like a currency passed only between the privileged. And now, in a single afternoon, it was crumbling. The panic gripped him like a vice. He stumbled to the desk, pulling out a sleek black laptop, fingers flying as he accessed what he thought was a secure, internal portal. Server 7, his last bargaining chip. If he could wipe it before the legal team locked him out entirely, maybe, just maybe, he could force a deal, twist the board's hand. Leverage dirt on the other executives. They all had skeletons buried in the system. He'd kept copies for years. The screen blinked. Access denied. User blocked. His heart skipped. He tried a backdoor. Access denied. Another. Unauthorized attempt logged. "Damn it," Harrison snarled, sweat prickling his temples. And then a message appeared on the screen. A single line. "You're done." He froze. The sender's ID read, J. Carter. Zoe. In that moment, Harrison understood. The walls weren't just closing in. They were already sealed. He slammed the laptop shut. Grabbing his jacket, he stormed toward the private elevator. If he could reach his car, the offshore accounts were still accessible. He could be on a plane to Dubai by morning, disappear long enough for things to cool. Money could fix anything. It always had. But as the elevator doors slid open, 2 uniformed security guards stepped inside. Harrison glared. "Get out of my way." They didn't. One of them spoke, his tone flat. "Mr. Lowell, you're no longer authorized to access this level. The board has revoked your security clearance." Harrison's hand twitched toward his phone, his only remaining weapon. "You have no right." But before he could finish, the other guard added, "Sir, the police have also been notified." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Harrison felt his world snap, not in some dramatic explosion, but in a quiet, sickening realization that the empire he'd built on stolen chances and silent suffering had been torn down by a janitor's son. And no amount of money could buy it back. He stepped back, breathing hard. For the first time in his career, Harrison Lowell had no control, no leverage, and no one left to protect him. As the guard stepped out of the elevator and escorted him toward the lobby, the building's internal communication system blinked a silent update across every office monitor. Grand Axis Corporate Board announcement, emergency session in progress, new executive appointments pending. Back in the boardroom, Marcus stood beside Elijah, his arm protective around the boy's shoulders. Zoe gave him a small, tired smile. "He's out. Security just confirmed it." Marcus exhaled slowly. Elijah looked up at his father. "Is it over?" Marcus shook his head, voice steady. "No, son, but it's our turn now." Because they both knew, tearing down a tyrant was only the beginning. What mattered was what you built in the wreckage. The morning came with the kind of sharp metallic light Chicago reserves for days of reckoning. Grand Axis Tower stood defiant against the skyline, its glass facade mirroring the cloudless sky, as if nothing beneath its polished surface had shifted. But inside, everything was different. The building buzzed with rumors. Executive assistants passed hurried messages in hushed tones. Analysts eyed their emails for official word. Departments waited for directives that never came. The overnight security logs were reviewed 3 times, as if a digital footprint could erase the fact that power had changed hands. In the executive conference room, now stripped of Harrison Lowell's personal effects, his custom leather chair conspicuously absent, the new center of authority gathered. Marcus Johnson stood near the window, looking down at the streets below. 6 years in this building, and this was the first time anyone had invited him above the 20th floor for anything other than a mop bucket. Elijah sat at the conference table, his small frame dwarfed by the high-backed chair, his eyes fixed on the laptop Zoe Carter had pushed in front of him. Zoe moved with the quiet precision of someone who'd waited too long for this moment and was determined not to waste it. Mary Ann Clark entered, her expression taut, carrying a slim file folder and a hard truth in her hands. Behind her, 2 members of the legal counsel team and the Singapore delegate took their seats. "Before we do anything else," Zoe began, "we need to decide what to do with the files on Server 7. Not just the theft logs, but the HR files." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Expose them." The room stilled. Mary Ann bristled. "Marcus, understand something. Those files name names, executives, department heads. There's legal risk, massive financial consequences. And those people ruined lives," Marcus shot back. "Denied promotions, cut opportunities, buried people like me and Zoe while pretending to celebrate diversity in the company newsletter. That truth belongs to everyone they hurt." Zoe's gaze met his. "I agree." Elijah spoke then, softly but firmly. "You said it was our turn now." Marcus looked at his son. In that small, steady voice there was no hesitation, no fear, just truth. "Show them," Marcus said. Mary Ann sighed, glancing at the Singaporean delegate. "You'll back this?" The delegate's mouth curved in a cold, pragmatic smile. "Scandal fades, integrity survives, and from a market standpoint, transparency will be far less damaging than another cover-up." Mary Ann slid the folder across the table. "Then we go public." Zoe handed Marcus a tablet displaying the draft of a company-wide announcement. Grand Axis corporate statement, effective immediately. It listed Harrison's removal, Everett's complicity, the illegal data siphoning, and, most importantly, the revelation of discriminatory practices that had stunted careers, falsified diversity metrics, and actively marginalized qualified staff. At the bottom of the statement was a commitment. Effective today, Grand Axis initiates a full internal audit, executive-level terminations pending, compensation reviews, and an independent external oversight committee. A new youth mentorship and scholarship fund will be created in Elijah Johnson's name. Marcus stared at it, something tight in his chest loosening for the first time in years. The Singapore delegate nodded. "We should release it before noon." "Markets will open in 2 hours." Mary Ann hesitated. "One more thing." She reached into her folder, extracting a small printed photograph, a screenshot from one of the files Elijah had recovered. It showed Marcus's name. Next to it, 4 declined internal promotion requests, each tagged with the code, "Candidate does not align with executive culture." Marcus felt a sharp pang in his chest, part fury, part vindication. "You were right," Mary Ann said quietly. "It wasn't your work. It was them." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he turned to Zoe. "Can you clear my record?" Zoe nodded. "Done. And every other name on that list." Mary Ann nodded, her eyes lowered. "I'll authorize it personally." Elijah tugged at his father's sleeve. "Does that mean you're not a janitor anymore?" Marcus crouched beside him, smiling through the sting behind his eyes. "No, son. It means I'm whatever I want to be now." Zoe smiled. Actually, if you'll accept it, Marcus, there's a facilities operations director seat open as of this morning. The room chuckled softly. Marcus laughed, shaking his head. I'll think about it. But the boy beside him, his son, his impossible, brilliant kid, had already cracked the ceiling no one ever expected them to breach. As the announcement went live minutes later, the screens around Grand Axis lit up with the truth. Not rumors, not managed press releases, but the raw, unvarnished proof of what had been done in the dark. And it wasn't just the employees watching. Across the city, across the industry, other companies noticed too, because nothing travels faster in corporate America than the scent of a toppled giant. And for once, the world knew exactly who to thank: a janitor and his son. By early afternoon, the building's digital signage no longer bore Harrison Lowell's face or smug company mottos. Instead, a bold, clean announcement rotated across every screen in the tower's lobbies and common spaces. Integrity resets everything. Below it, the names of terminated executives scrolled in sober text, alongside a list of pending reforms. For some, it was a relief. For others, an ominous reckoning. The official press release had hit every major business news outlet before noon. The fallout was swift and brutal. Financial journalists labeled it one of the most significant corporate reckonings in a decade. Activist investors seized the moment, praising Grand Axis's decision while quietly positioning themselves for influence. Government labor committees announced inquiries. Competitors scrambled to review their own hiring and data security protocols. And in the middle of it all, a 10-year-old boy named Elijah Johnson walked through the Grand Axis headquarters at his father's side, greeted now not with dismissive glances but wary, uncertain nods. Marcus felt the weight of those looks, but they didn't sting the way they used to. Not today. Inside the executive conference room, no longer Harrison's dominion, Zoe Carter chaired the emergency board session. This time, the agenda wasn't about saving face. It was about building something new. Marcus sat quietly beside her, watching the room carefully. Elijah, fidgeting with the sleeves of his hoodie, stayed close. First item, Zoe began. Effective immediately, all hiring practices and promotion records will be made transparent, every decision subject to review by the independent oversight committee being assembled. There were nods. Second, Marianne added, sounding more like a woman learning how to shed a skin than one offering excuses, we approve the launch of the Elijah Johnson Tech Initiative, STEM scholarships for underrepresented youth, mentorship programs, and a youth coding lab funded directly from the company's executive bonus pool. That last part wasn't negotiable. The Singapore delegate gave an approving nod. It's a wise investment. The London rep, more grudging, followed suit. Markets had stabilized since morning, and damage control had its costs. Better to embrace the moment than fight it. Marcus glanced at Elijah. The boy smiled, the kind of shy, disbelieving grin of a kid still unsure whether this was a dream. Third, Zoe said, we amend our board composition. Grand Axis will reserve 2 seats for employee-elected representatives, one from salaried staff, one from hourly. It won't fix the past, but it gives a voice where there was none. Murmurs of surprise. This wasn't just PR. It was power redistribution. It was systemic. And Marcus recognized it for what it was. A start. Before anyone could object, Zoe turned to Marcus. We'd also like to formally offer you the Director of Facilities Operations role. Marcus gave a dry chuckle. You folks love titles. But his eyes softened as he looked at Elijah. I'll take it, Marcus said. On one condition. Marianne raised an eyebrow. Name it. You honor every promotion denied in those files. You call those people. You make it right. Not next week, not next quarter. Today. A long beat. Then Zoe nodded. Done. Marcus extended a hand. Then we've got a deal. The room's tension loosened, replaced by something unspoken. Acknowledgement. Respect earned the hard way. As the meeting adjourned, Elijah was mobbed by a small group of younger employees, IT techs, and newly emboldened staff who'd once hidden in the margins. They wanted to thank him, to shake his hand, to tell him their nieces and nephews would hear about him tonight at dinner. For the first time, Elijah stood tall, no longer shrinking into his father's shadow, but stepping into his own light. Marcus watched his son carefully. This wasn't just about Grand Axis anymore. It was about what came next, about every kid told to stay in their lane, about every overlooked janitor, cafeteria worker, and assistant whose brilliance was buried under job titles and assumptions. Zoe rejoined him by the window. "You know you're going to be a legend after this," she said with a small smile. Marcus grinned. "Nah, I'm just a man who raised a good kid." "Exactly," Zoe said. "And that's what scares them most." They both knew this victory wasn't the end of the fight. Racism and gatekeeping didn't die overnight because a company got caught, but a door had opened, and now they had the keys. Marcus looked down at his calloused hands, the same ones that had pushed a mop through these halls, that had built things no one noticed, that had protected his boy when no one else cared. He squeezed Zoe's hand briefly. "Let's build something better." Zoe's smile was fierce. "We already started." And as Elijah's laughter rang out across the room, Marcus felt it settle in his bones. A new order, built by the ones nobody saw coming. The days that followed unfolded like a slow tide rolling in, washing away what had once seemed immovable. Grand Axis's skyline-dominating headquarters no longer belonged to Harrison Lowell or his hand-picked inner circle. The name still gleamed from the facade, but inside its foundation was being gutted and rebuilt by hands it had once ignored. By the end of the week, 8 executive terminations had been finalized. Legal counsel had opened public investigations into the discriminatory practices Elijah's discovery uncovered, and the story had hit national news, not as a scandal Grand Axis buried, but as one it chose to confront. The company was forced in the most public way imaginable to name its sins, and in doing so, it became something the business world hadn't seen in years, a firm capable of learning. The mentorship program launched within days. Applications flooded in from neighborhoods the board had never bothered to pronounce. Zoe Carter was formally promoted to Chief Integrity Officer, a title she insisted on because it sounded like a badge of war, and no one disagreed. On a brisk Friday afternoon, Marcus Johnson stood at the front of the new Elijah Johnson Tech Lab on the building's renovated 4th floor. Gone were the gray cubicles and dim lights. In their place gleamed rows of sleek computers, robotics kits, and walls painted in bold colors with murals by local artists. One of them depicting Elijah himself, crouched over a keyboard, lines of code swirling into a phoenix behind him. It still felt surreal. He wasn't scrubbing floors anymore. The badge on his chest now read Director of Facilities Operations, but titles had never mattered to Marcus. What mattered was that his son, and dozens like him, would never again be treated like shadows in a world built to ignore them. A small ceremony gathered company staff and community leaders. Journalists lingered at the edges. The Singaporean investor attended via livestream, offering carefully worded remarks about courage and untapped talent. But the most important words came from Marcus. He cleared his throat, glancing at Elijah, who stood beside him, wearing a collared shirt for the first time in months. Elijah looked like he still didn't know what to do with all the attention, but he held his head high. Marcus spoke. "A lot of folks here know me as the man who mopped these floors for 6 years. And I did. I took care of this building the way I took care of my home. Because sometimes, even when nobody sees you, you take pride in what you do. You give your best. Not because they pay you well, not because they thank you, but because you know you're worthy, even if the world forgets it." He paused. "I wasn't supposed to be standing here today, and my boy sure wasn't supposed to be the one to save this company from itself. But that's the thing about truth. It don't ask permission. It don't knock before it walks in. The room was silent now, all eyes on him. I'm proud of my son. Not just because he's smart, not just because he fixed what grown men broke, but because when he saw wrong, he didn't stay quiet, and that's what makes a man. Marcus looked at Elijah, his voice softening. You changed everything, son. A tear slid down Elijah's cheek. He grinned, embarrassed. The room erupted in applause. Marcus finished. To every kid out there who's been told to stay quiet, to every janitor, cafeteria worker, security guard who's been made invisible, this is your proof. You are seen, and this world is yours to crack wide open. More applause. The ceremony closed, but the change had already happened. You could feel it in the way people moved through the halls, no longer blind to those they'd ignored. In the emails from young programmers, the letters from fathers and mothers who saw their own sons and daughters in Elijah's story, Marcus and Zoe walked the length of the tech lab after the crowd dispersed, both of them carrying the weight of what was left to fix, but also something heavier: hope. You realize, Zoe said, smiling, you just gave them a blueprint. Marcus chuckled. Good. Now let's see how many of them are brave enough to follow it. As they reached the exit, Elijah came running up. Dad! Marcus crouched. What is it, little man? Elijah held out a small tablet screen. It showed a message from one of the community coding programs Elijah had applied to months ago and forgotten. Congratulations. You've been selected for the National Youth Coders Fellowship. Full scholarship. Start date, this summer. Elijah's hands trembled. They picked me. Marcus grinned. No, son, you earned it. They embraced, a knot of grief, pride, and unspoken promises unraveling between them. In a city that never made room for kids like Elijah, a city that told men like Marcus where they belonged, something permanent had shifted, and though the fight ahead would be long and crooked, they were no longer alone. The boy who saved a company would save so much more. Because power changes hands in two ways, when it's taken and when it's earned, and this time it was both. As the evening shadows stretched long across the city skyline, Marcus Johnson found himself alone on the rooftop terrace of Grand Axis Tower. The wind tugged at his jacket, carrying with it the restless pulse of Chicago, the low hum of traffic, the distant wail of a siren, and the countless unspoken stories of people who, like him, had worked invisible jobs beneath towers built by men who never learned their names. He looked out over the streets, thinking about the faces in the mural downstairs. Elijah's young eyes, bright and defiant, framed by streaks of digital light and fire. He thought about the janitors still sweeping office floors, the cafeteria workers cleaning empty tables, the single mothers on night shifts, the kids with hand-me-down laptops teaching themselves code between chores. For so long, the system had taught them that their value was transactional. That brilliance could only be born in certain zip codes, wearing certain clothes, speaking in boardroom dialects. But today proved what Marcus had known deep down his whole life. Brilliance is everywhere. It lives in overlooked corners and unpolished voices, waiting for the moment when it's needed most. And when it arrives, it changes everything. The night air smelled different now, not clean, not easy, but honest. He thought about Zoe, already at her desk, drafting policies that would outlive them both. About the Singapore delegate, who had seen not just risk, but power and decency. About Marianne Clark, humbled and rebuilding. And about his boy, asleep in the back seat of Marcus's old sedan, as they prepared to head home, unaware that people across the country now spoke his name. This wasn't a fairy tale. Racism didn't evaporate. The old guards didn't vanish. There would be days ahead when the fight felt heavier than progress, but something foundational had cracked, and in its place, there was room for new names, new leaders, new legends. Marcus gripped the railing and exhaled a long, slow breath. Let them call him a janitor. Let them call him director. Neither title would ever mean as much to him as being Elijah's father. That boy was the future, not just for Grand Axis, not just for the neighborhood they came from, but for every boardroom, classroom, and city block that had ever tried to decide who was worthy. Marcus smiled to himself. The system failed. And then a boy walked in, and it would never be the same.